Good morning, everyone. Nice to see so many of you that I have seen a few times over the years. We got a lot of ground to cover today, so I'm going to try to get through some introductory things first, because Brian will start to give me the evil eye if I don't. Got Brian Idle from Peacock and Lewis, and Nilo, I never can pronounce your last name.
That's all right. It's Free-Jamel.
That's what I said. From Spino O'Rourke Architects. So we've got an interesting day laid out for us today, where you get to hear some pretty interesting and insightful perspectives from the team that you end up hiring to take on all these major projects. So pretty interesting, because if any of you looked at the pictures that were scrolling before we came in, there's a lot of work going on all around the state. I have the good fortune of traveling all around the country, but having lived in Jupiter here for 30 some years, I get to see everything that's going up and down from Broward, Dade, Palm Beach, Martin, Indian River County. And it's on steroids, what's happening out there these days. No surprise to all of you. Most clubs have seen 25 to 40% churn of their membership over the last 5 years, which has caused, how do we manage tradition and stay relevant? Yeah, it's the most common topic probably I get to talk about in the club space out there. So we're going to start out with our architects. We're going to bring up our GCs after the break, and then after their break, we're going to talk insurance. So we cover a lot of ground. The key thing on all of this is that I want as many of your questions as I can get. That's my phone number up on the screen at the bottom, and it'll be up on a number of slides. So we were over at Mediterra in Naples on last Wednesday doing the same sort of thing. I probably got 70 questions sent to me. So don't hesitate. And obviously, if you, as I had said to Nilo and Brian, if you want to ask a question, is a blue roof appropriate for a new clubhouse in South Florida? It's probably too narrowly focused. But if you've got some broad questions or something that you're working on right now that really is important to get some perspective on, I will try to get to them all. All these folks are going to stay behind at breaks and at lunch, so you'll get to really pin them down should you wish to do so after we're done with the session today. So a couple of things as we go into this. We've noted with Paul, interesting, and it wasn't in some of the slides that I saw, but some of my observation going around the country and around the state, one of the areas, surprisingly and frankly wonderfully, that's getting greater focus on are employee areas. The heart of the house, and the areas that had often been overlooked. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a club and the employees are in a room that has no windows. It has chicken fingers and pasta every day for lunch, and it's the repository for every broken piece of furniture coming out of the members' dining room. And at the same time, we have the conversation, well, we want to elevate service to a significant higher level, but we're saying we appreciate you as staff to the point where we're giving you all this secondary information. This is an employee break room. I think you designed it, didn't you, Brian, over at Mediterra. They've got libraries in staff areas, staff reading centers, and how do we get better at what we're doing? I thought this one was really cool, and this isn't the only place I've seen it. I've seen it in lots of different clubs around the country, but employee training areas that are frankly as nice as some of the member spaces in some cases. And you all know this, I don't mean to sound preachy as I say it, but we can build all the stuff that these guys will talk about today. If you don't have the team that can deliver the experience, good luck. No matter how much bells and whistles and granite and marble you put in there, if the team isn't supported and recognized, good luck being able to enjoy the elevated experience that we're always trying to get. So that's me. I get to travel around. We've got Brian and Nilo talking about architectural things today. Lots of good stuff that we're going to be looking at here. So I want to get right into this. And I'm going to, Brian, start with you.
And how much time do we have left?
Yeah. We got about an hour. You'll be fine.
Okay.
I'm going to bounce back and forth. But so we're all here. Either some of us are in the midst of projects. We're thinking about projects. How does it work best in your mind to not only, when we're thinking about these, how do we get started? How do we get our arms around this? When do we bring the team together to assemble? And as importantly as anything else, how do we get it socialized with the membership to gain support? Because we're all, everybody probably in the room has to get member support for any projects that you do. How do we get that whole process moving?
Yeah, first of all, and thank all of you for being here today. There's going to be an opportunity to review this. It's being taped, so you can take it back to the boardroom and review it later. We always believe in a member-driven process, one where as many members can join in the process as possible to help build the project, whatever it might be, a renovation to the clubhouse, it might be a new aquatics complex or rackets club, a variety of different options. It could be a brand new clubhouse. We're doing a lot of replacement clubhouses these days. But it's one where we engage the membership right from jump. And it's getting a survey of the members. What is it that they're looking for to enhance their life at the club, to get better value out of their membership, and enjoy the club amenities more? And so after we get the survey back, that informs us on a direction that we go in the process, working with the leadership of the club and the management team of the club. And so once we feel like we have, the leadership could be not only the board, but chairmans of standing committees, and even the standing committees. The more folks that we touch in this process, the better the outcome. And you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, I designed a home with a spouse and it took us forever because we couldn't agree on things. Well, yeah, now we're building a house for 1,600 bodies, so it does get a little challenging, but we feel that if the members help design it, it's going to be voted in the affirmative. So we go through many iterations in the process. We believe in a good, better, best philosophy. Each of the options would have a different price tag and disruption plan and temporary facilities and cost and financing. And so going through the good, better, best, reasonable people given a good data, everything we do is data driven, they make good decisions. And so, and then the socialization piece, we come back to the members and we go through workshops, have them give us more feedback. We distill it down with leadership, sign the right price tag to it with our construction partners, and put a booklet together, a coffee table book and a video that they can refer to later, and we get a positive vote, move forward. It's that easy.
It's that easy, I know. Yeah, and many of you in the room have heard me say this. We live in a very feedback-rich environment in the club world, right? We are not
that's for sure.
looking for too far and wide to get a lot of input, right, wrong, or otherwise. Nilo, picking up on that, how do you, if you're surveying the membership, we're surveying those that are here. What about keeping it relevant? For you and I were talking before we came up here, the fact that we've had so much movement from the Northeast, Upper Midwest down here. A lot of wealth has moved down to this. Many of the newest members want what they want when they want it and aren't necessarily ready to wait. How do we balance the tradition and the new member expectations? And if we're only surveying the current members, how do we know what we should be doing?
It's a good question. And I think one of the key factors when we start to look at these projects is, what does kind of the future life cycle of these look like also? And we try to build a lot of flexibility into the spaces that we're adding to clubs, right? So that they can evolve as the membership evolves, so that certain elements that may expand or contract in their use don't end up landlocked, right, within the building or within the facility. And I think it's really important to ask ourselves, if that demographic shift does take place and continues, what do we think that membership is going to want? And it's, it's a little bit of a magic 8-ball that we hope we get right. And then we have to sell that to the current membership too, right? Which is the big challenge. And I think to, kind of play on what Brian was saying earlier about membership involvement, I think membership just wants to feel heard, right? They want to feel like they were part of the process. We may not always agree with what they've had to say, and it may not ultimately be incorporated into the project in the way that they thought it would be, but they felt like they were part of the process. They felt heard.
So Neil, what's been the best method that you've employed to help the fiduciaries of the club, the volunteer leaders who have been elected to make some of these decisions along with the paid leadership staff to bring everybody else along on this ride? How do you educate them, and how do you best see them educating the rest of the membership to get as much buy-in as potential?
We've seen an enormous benefit from those smaller focus groups, right, with memberships. And it may be 50 people, and we'll present a project in a very early conceptual stage. Maybe there's budgeting associated with that, maybe there isn't at that time. And that's where members feel comfortable of expressing their voice. It's funny, we'll have 3 or 4 focus groups on one project, and every group tends to take on a different tenor, but there's kind of a consensus almost within the room, and they all tend to focus on something a little different about the project. And I think that kind of snowballs within the room and builds some momentum. Mm-hmm. And they've been hugely beneficial. There have been things that maybe as the architectural team, as the management team, as the board, we didn't necessarily see it from that perspective. And there's always been very good insight that's come out of this.
Interesting.
Yeah, building on that, I would say we've also found it very beneficial not to assign people to come to groups. We have a random sign up, various age groups, various interest groups, and have the membership teach each other what's important to each different age group and interest group.
Yeah. And don't you find it most effective if it's a wide demographic?
Totally. Yeah. Because, people, as they transition through life, they have different priorities at the club. And it's great for everyone to get a perspective what's important to different people.
Brian, what are you seeing as, or Neil, did you have follow-up?
No, go ahead.
What are you seeing, Brian, as the most often requested, this is what's the catalyst for us talking about a project? What's the trend right now that you're seeing? A bar.
Yeah.
Can't have enough bars.
Cannot have enough bars. It's indoor bars, outdoor bars, bars next to bocce, the pre-function bar, the poolside bar. You just have to have a lot of bars.
Oh.
Yeah. We're going back to our college days. We're doing bars in the center of rooms where we can all gather around and look at each other, and but now we have the money to enjoy it. As Discovery said, we're making playgrounds for people that have money to spend. And so it's, bars, gathering areas, people, we're social animals. And I think we learned during the pandemic, we just did not like being separated from each other. And so we've come back very, very much in a robust fashion with our gathering spaces. We're also doing a lot of specialty restaurants at our clubs. And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but there's a little more traffic on the road in Florida. And if you go to Open Table to get your reservation, you may not get the reservation you like. And so members of clubs are using their facilities more than ever. And the wait lists are growing and the point of entry gets higher and higher. And so if we can create your favorite environment here at the club, there's not a great reason to, battle the traffic and go out and try to find your favorite spot outside of the gates.
So one of the questions that came in, Nilo, is besides members, who else is in the room in these focus group sessions? And what's the right size for those in your view?
So, we can tackle the size first. We've seen around 45 to 50 people kind of be the right size for those. And, we don't care if we have to have 2, 3, 4, 5 of those to garner a good cross-section of membership. But any more than 50 people and it starts to become more of a presentation and less of a dialogue. And we want it to be an intimate dialogue. And we think that, apart from just membership, we would obviously have club leadership and club management. And depending on the project type, sometimes it's helpful to have staff directly associated with that section of the club in the meeting as well. There may be some questions that are so granular that we really need staff's input and staff's direction on those. So
right.
If it was a tennis center, we would have the tennis pro at the club, as part of the focus group in the room with us.
Got it. And Brian, you just mentioned Discovery. And for those of you in the audience, if you're not familiar, Discovery Land is a major developer around the country. Backed up in Martin County, they're doing a project called Atlantic Fields, which is 36 holes. And I saw some numbers the other day of what the initial land price real estate sales were going to be, and it's off the charts up there. But when you talk about discovery, it reminded me many clubs have gone into this with the recommendation, you need to start thinking like you're a developer. And I'm curious whether that resonates with you, because I've heard that several times.
That's a great point, Kurt. There was a period of time where we would never use the word resort and club in the same sentence. That was blasphemy. Now, unless you have resort amenities at your club, you're not relevant. And so Discovery, we're doing the project at Atlantic Fields, and we're learning a lot from them on allowing people to have fun. And that's ultimately what we want to do when we're at our clubs is have fun, have the best quality, the best team members, an integrated group of people that you enjoy spending time with, creating great family memories. And so you'll notice that in our club world today, we're putting a real emphasis on family-friendly amenities where I always said, now that I have 5, you never want to be the club where the grandchildren don't want to be. So we're doing more kids clubs and playgrounds and splash pads and aquatic centers and things that may be out of the mainstream of the club culture as it was originally set up. Your point about an eye to the past and heritage, but the respect of that, but an eye to what the future will be and the next generation of members and what they're looking for. I often get feedback from realtors, and they said our first stop in the gate, once we're inside the gate, our first stop is going to be the fitness center, the spa, and the aquatics complex. Now, 20 years ago, it was the man riding in the front seat, and he was saying, show me the golf course and the men's locker room. Those are not as important as they used to be. And so, the spas, the salons, where are we going to get all of our needs taken care of, and where will the families gather? Where will my children? And, you look at today, you can office just about anywhere. And so we're seeing the migration of people coming to the clubs and wanting to conduct business. So we're doing Zoom rooms, and we're doing the Starbucks and the coffee shops, the markets, the things that you can only, whether you're officing at home or at the club, you have to kind of get outside of the 4 walls. And so all of these dynamics are changing what clubs are today.
Interesting. Nilo, any follow-up there? And as you're talking about, thinking like a developer and anything in that regard, how do we get the people that have lived in our community for 25 plus years who I like what I like and I don't want to see change buy into that? And some of them, I've heard them say, well, I don't know that I'm going to be here for more than 3 or 4 years, and I don't want this club to be under renovation for 2 or 3 of those years. How do we manage that dynamic plus all the new amenities?
Yeah, construction fatigue is a real issue within clubs, right? And it's one that we have very early on in the start of either a long-term master planning or a capital campaign for a major renovation. Is what is the current appetite within the club for a long, drawn-out construction process, and how do we phase that, given the seasonal nature of a lot of our clubs, to try to minimize the impact during season to the membership? And we're, it's a challenge to try to balance that with this shift in demographics that, that you and I were speaking about. And I think that's what drives a lot of some of the amenities Brian was talking about, right? The kids club, the splash pads, a bar in every room is this kind of shift in demographic we've seen as younger wealth has come down during the pandemic, from New York and other markets and are setting roots here. Mm-hmm. And we actually see that changes that little seasonal break that we used to get too. There are more year-round uses at private clubs than there have been historically. We don't see this kind of off-season break like we used to. We see younger families staying here year-round longer.
Right.
I think it requires kind of careful planning and consideration and capturing those moments of interruption that we can to try to help minimize the construction fatigue.
Got it.
And being sensitive to how often major projects like that take place also.
Got it. So Brian, you and I were talking about this with some of our GC team as we were gathering today. One of the interesting challenges that I've heard out in the industry as well, we were going down this path, we got these pretty pictures developed, we had a preliminary budget, and then it came in at 1.8 times the preliminary budget. How do we get out in front of this to gain buy-in? When does that, take us on the linear process of that process, what you think is the best practice to get the right information in front of the people when they need it?
Yeah, so most clubs have a policy where they have to interview their design professionals. And so we'll follow into the room after each other and we'll present why we're the best team and why we're a good fit for the whole team that you're putting together. And we believe, and I'm sure you do too, is that we want to see the contractor at the table from the very beginning. And a lot of club members will say, well, then you've lost your competitive edge. How can you have a contractor sitting with you from the very beginning of the project? And it's very important because they have their finger on the pulse daily of commodity changes, labor shifts, what's available materials, particularly in today's market, what's taking longer to get, what's readily available. And so we design our documents based on contractor feedback. We also like our contractors to bring subcontractors to the table and say, the general is the orchestra leader of all these subcontractors that are creating the music. So we get subcontractor input as well. And it's not only the price that's important, it's the constructability of the project. And so bringing that group together, one team, one dream concept is what we really encourage our clients to do, is bring the team together, interview your general contractors, find out their success rate working with the architects and interior designers that you've chosen, and put that whole team together right at the very beginning.
So Nilo, any further thoughts on who's part of that team?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with Brian more, right? Bringing the right team together early in the process, it provides so much benefit to clubs and club membership. And it's, an architect and a contractor that have worked together in the past that know how each other work and can make sure that there aren't any of those gaps like you suggested, right? That 1.8x gap that, maybe it wasn't in our documents, maybe it wasn't in their assumptions, but to, kind of bring the whole team to the table, it kind of dilutes and shares that responsibility across the entire, the entire project team. Because at the end of the day, if the project isn't successful at the end, everybody involved in the team failed. It doesn't matter if it was because of us or because of the contractor or because of the interior designer. We're a team and we're here to deliver an exceptional experience to membership. And that's what's important at the end of the day. So the sooner you get the team together, the sooner the band starts practicing, right, the better the music's going to be at the performance.
So who all is on that team? Because one of the big misses that I keep hearing out there is, well, we're going down the road. We feel like we've got our GC and our architect, and all of a sudden now we got a kitchen designer in 4 months after all your work's done. And the world. So who's on that team, Nilo, to begin with?
It's absolutely the kitchen designer if there's a restaurant and F&B component. It's any of the other specialty designers that may be relevant to the project. Interior design can be one that can really take a budget and cause a big shift in it. I think it depends how involved membership is in the interior design. Is there a design committee? I think there should be. typically in most cases, right? We don't want to, just like we don't design the building and the program and the functions in a vacuum without membership input, we don't want the aesthetic to be without membership input also. So it's as many design professionals as we can bring on board early in the process. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah, in addition to the kitchen designer, kitchen and bar equipment designer, we want to get the lighting designer in as soon as possible, because there's two elements that allow our engineers to complete their work. It's all the rough ends and all of the lighting and dimming systems, and so two critical elements and low voltage. If we get low voltage integrated. Okay, so that's the speakers, the security system, the POS
all the
system,
MEP
the
stuff,
ThoroGuard. Right? Well, it's not line voltage, it's low voltage. So,
how about our civil?
Civil's very important. Typically, an owner hired consultant, and there's probably it's the longest permitting element of the entire project is the civil engineering. So it's the South Florida Water Management District. It's all the water and sewer department. It's and FP&L. From the time you think you have a project, contact FP&L right now. You will not get your transformer to open your building unless you start today. Even if you're thinking of a project in the next 5 years, contact them now. That's a crisis.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Nilo, on this, I'm curious on two things, and I'll ask you both, but Nilo, I'll start with you. Who quarterbacks all this, and how do we, if we're just thinking about a project, it sounds like we're assembling quite a team and spending a lot of money before we even know whether the members are going to support it. How do we manage that dynamic?
So I think usually by the time we bring some of the other team members onto the project, we know generally if the project has member support or not, right? We've done some of that preliminary conceptual presentation, maybe a small committee meeting or two. But once we start to bring that on board, typically we'll act as the conductor of the orchestra, as the architect, and we'll quarterback a lot of that design and coordination early on, along with our general contracting partners. And then as more subcontractor input, FPL, kind of more of the boots on the ground type team members start to come into the conversation, then we'll share that responsibility with the general contractor, all under the leadership of the GM or the board president or whoever from the club has taken the most active role in the project.
And I'm sure, Nilo, you do this as well. We make a list of all the consultants that the owner needs to hire. And we'll give them recommendations on who we've worked with in the past that have been very successful in what they do.
Right.
Yeah. But
so on this,
and so to close the loop on that thought, most people think that a construction project, they get the number from the contractor, and that's what they can take to the board and to the membership. Well, that's about 50% of the overall project cost. Another 30% are the soft cost, and another, in today's world, 20% is the contingency. Yeah. Believe it or not.
20% contingency.
Yes.
And
it used to be 60-40. We'd say construction 60, 40 is soft cost, and within those they have a little contingency. We live in a crazy environment right now where we're not sure that the products that we have specified will be available when the time comes to buy them. So there oftentimes we see price increases that used to be every January you'd see a price increase. Now, I don't know, Mike, Barry, how many price increases do we see during the year? Depends what war broke out in what country, and if you can get stainless steel or you can get, whatever it is. So,
So Nilo, I had a question or two, and it kind of dovetails onto this. Do we need a project manager? What's the difference between a project manager and an owner's rep? And, again, the whole quarterbacking process. What's best practice from your view, and why?
So I think a lot of it depends on the composition and makeup of the club and the project type. We usually like to recommend that we at least discuss bringing an owner's rep on board, for one reason only. The GM, the board president, the facility director, right? Whoever may be spearheading the project on the club side, they have a day job also, right? They have to run the club or they have to run the facilities. And there are things like chasing down FPL, coordinating the overall schedule with all of these consultants that really falls under the purview of somebody like an owner's rep or a project manager. And sometimes we act in that capacity. Sometimes it makes sense to bring in a third party to act in that capacity.
And how early do they come in if it is somebody from the outside and not one of you?
I think we want them involved as early as possible in the process also, right? The faster the team becomes familiar working with one another, the higher chance of success we have moving forward.
Particularly if it requires zoning approval.
Yes.
Zoning approval is anything typically over 500 air-conditioned square feet of.
So everything.
Yeah. I mean, well, if you're adding to the building and it changes the site plan, it has to go back for zoning approval. And that's typically about an 8-month process. And that does involve the civil engineer and the landscape architect and, us to create the graphics that support that zoning application. So there does need it requires somebody that knows what they're doing to orchestrate that whole submittal.
So I'm curious, every community and every club I visit, I have the same, well, Kurt, you have to understand, we're unique. We got the toughest approval governmental agency, whether it's Palm Beach County or St. John's, Roger, I've heard it everywhere I've gone. Who develops that relationship, Brian, with I live in Jupiter.
Right.
Who am I, was it Jupiter or Palm Beach County or whichever? Who develops that relationship and when do we start developing that relationship?
So typically the land planner is who you hire that has the relationship with the governmental officials in the zoning department. And the land planners, and we have a list of 5 or 6 that we work with that will understand the project, advise you on the governmental agencies that will be approving that project and what consultants you need to hire to get this through their process. And you're right. Each one of them has kind of created this badge of honor of how long it takes to get through our municipality to get an approval process. It's pretty daunting.
And this team now feels like an army that we've got working for us before we even have member approval at this point. So Nilo, I'm interested. What can, from an architectural perspective, what can the architect do to support the construction company, the GC, in delivering the most accurate pricing? How does that whole relationship work best? And what can you do to help make it happen?
Yeah, so I think, so apart from having the team involved very early and being transparent about our design intent, when the preliminary documents are pulled together for pricing, the contractor relies on our experience as architects to make sure that those early documents will include price drivers, right? Will include anything that may not be readily apparent just by the general scope of the renovation, right? If it's a 500 square foot addition and we don't specify that it needs, $3 million worth of some type of specialty geotech systems underneath the foundation, they're not going to know to include that in their pricing. So kind of leveraging our experience as architects to make sure that our early documents capture those big picture budget items that may not be readily apparent in looking at just a general set of early design development documents.
Right.
I think that's a big key piece. And just having open lines of regular communication and having us both at the table during all of these design review meetings and these early conceptual meetings, they have the same inherent knowledge that we have about the project. Instead of us going to the meetings and then trying to communicate it back to them, it's getting everybody at the table at the same time.
So Brian, you and I were talking about this early this morning. And, I remember back in my days of managing clubs and going through one of the first projects that you did back in the late 90s with me. Everybody wants the number. And how do we best manage that whole process? How far along do we have to be to start to provide better, closer numbers so that we don't surprise people? What's the whole dynamic there in your mind?
Well, and it is this team approach, the partnering process that we've employed, for the last 60 years on our projects is making sure we understand clearly each stakeholder's position in the project and what they're expecting out of the project. And then we all work as a team to make sure that everyone's needs to, Nilo's point, it doesn't matter who fails, the project's a failure if one of the parties fails. So, bringing together the team early in the process, I can't overemphasize. I do remember that project, Kurt, and I think what made it wildly successful is the morale boost that you gave every team member on a weekly basis. So you have to picture a project that is a renovation to an existing club. And Kurt would be found on Saturday
going on this.
Sweeping the floors of the construction project. So on Monday morning, when the contractors came back, they had a clean environment to work in. Now, I'd never seen that before, but what a boost it was for all these.
There's a lot of managers in the audience going, oh my God.
But you were on Bobcats cleaning things up too. And so if you can, again, I go back to, don't choose sides among the team members. Make sure the team is fully integrated. It's just like your culinary team or your golf staff or whatever it might be. The best outcomes come when everybody is, rowing the water at the same pace and knows what the outcome is going to be, or have a common goal.
Yeah.
It's one example I give, a common failure that I see is that the club will write a contract with a contractor and never give the architect a copy of the contract so we know what they're held to and what the expectation is of us to get to the finish line. And I say, can I have a copy of the contract? Oh, no, you can't see that. Well, wait a minute. They were held to 7 days, or we were held to 7 days on a turnaround on an RFI, but in our contract, we said it was 10 days. It was, working days, and on theirs, it was calendar days. And so you've created this conflict right off the bat. Another common mistake I see is that you incentivize your contractor to save money during the construction project, and then you'll split it with them at the end. If you're going to save money during the buyout of a project with the subcontractors, that means there are substitutions from what was specified and we all worked on for 12 months to create. We wrote a book, right? We wrote the book with what we thought was going to be best, and you priced. Now they go to the subcontractor market, and you can save $1 if you make this substitution. The problem in today's world is we have to change our drawings because the inspectors won't inspect unless what is on the drawings is what they are building. So now it's cost you time. It's cost us money to change the drawings. That was never figured in. So if you ever go the route of VE, value engineering, still don't know what that means, what value you get out of it, but make sure there's a line item that says it's a $10 savings, it's costing $2 to change the drawings, and there'll be a 2-week delay in the project if you do this. Fully understand all aspects of that $10 savings that you're getting. I kind of jumped into their world a little bit.
Well, we're going to ask them whether they agree with you here. When they
we tend to jump into their world a little bit.
Well, we have to,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and I think to that point too, it's really important for that that value engineering phase. I still don't know what it means either, but to do that not at the end of the construction documents, right? As we're trying to go through permitting, we're trying to get boots on the ground, we're trying to hit a May 1st start of construction because everybody's gone for the season. That happens much earlier in the process. And that's why it's important not just to bring the general contractors on board early, but to get their subcontractor input very early. Right. Because those are where a lot of those value engineering suggestions come from, right? They understand that if they substitute this product for this product, there's a savings, not just in the cost of the product, but maybe the installation time, or there's a better warranty, or they can get it faster. And the sooner we have those conversations, the less disruption there is, like what Brian was talking about, right? Soft costs and time
Right.
to revise the drawings. We work really hard to try to bake that process into the overall development of the documents.
So staying on this topic of budgets and so on, one of the questions that I got from the audience, one of the biggest challenges we've seen is the inability of boards and leadership teams to budget the extra costs associated with construction. What I've usually seen is a lack of focus on temporary facilities, a lack of focus on insurance, and we're going to talk about insurance later on today, and when and what you cover and how, who's responsible for what there. And then a major miss, which isn't always capital, but a major miss on, we're going to open this on New Year's Eve. And how do you open on New Year's Eve? That lack of soft opening, scheduling, and so on.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as and Nilo, let's start with you. What typically gets overlooked in your experience, and how can we get out in front of that?
So I think the soft opening is one that almost always gets overlooked. And we put together a schedule for every project very early, and that schedule is going to change throughout the process. But when we start a project, we put together a schedule, and we always include that as a 2 to 3 week line item, as a soft opening at the end of construction, and then we show opening day. And if we're trying to target a very specific event or opening timeline throughout the season, then we'll back out from that, and we try to bake a little bit of wiggle room into each one of our phases along the way. We'll pad the member approval a little bit, because that never goes as quickly as everybody thinks it will. So we like to bake those items into our schedule from the very beginning, because we have seen them overlooked in the past.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a horror story.
Yeah.
Just this past week, we had 700 people for a grand opening of a new rackets club. The bands were there, the food and beverage, members were having a great time. And I called the GM and I said, I've got some other clubs that want to come see it. And he said, delay them. I go, what happened? He goes, we had to take all the furniture out. The fire marshal didn't give us the final CO. I go, really? I thought.
But you had the party?
We had the party. And he said, well, it was one item that was missed. And so he had us take all the furniture out of the building. So don't have him come down this week, have him come down next week. I said, what was the one item? He said, well, the address that was on the construction documents didn't match the final address of our building. And for that, you had, so I'm just telling you, allow the 3 weeks for the soft opening.
Always.
Allow another month to get final approvals.
It's interesting, which dovetails, I get another question. How many months before the project construction start date should the design and focus group process start? What's that linear, in a normal world, realistically? Nilo, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, we try to time these focus groups and big presentations kind of to bookend the season, right? So depending on the timing of when we start, we'll either start the season or end the season with the focus groups, and then follow it up with kind of an executive summary after we've been integrating all the feedback and information from the focus groups. So that right there is at least a 1 season or 1 year process. And then we have to actually finish all the documents. So, we typically see it as kind of a 2-year process at minimum to get through this the right way before we start construction.
So, it's a year in the process to define what it is you're going to do, and then a year in the process to do the drawings and get the permits. And it used to be a year in the process to build it, but now it's a year and a half to 2 years to get it built.
You're exciting everybody in the audience.
Yeah, so a lot of our members say, I'd really like to enjoy it while I'm still alive, but it's about a 4 year process.
So you've touched on this, but I want to make sure and I know you've both have perspective on this, but the question is, what percentage of construction docs are most clubs using when they go to bid? And there's, what are we using most? And then there's ideally, what would you like to have?
So, you want me to start?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so it's a multi-answered question. We typically will go to permit with about 80% docs, because the permitting process, what used to be quick, is now maybe 2 to 3 months to get a permit. So during the 2 to 3 months, we are putting the final decisions of the VE, any final ID, any final F&B, all the final stuff goes into those docs, and the building department comments. So they have sometimes we're seeing 3 rounds of comments come back. And so sometimes it materially changes some of what you designed. We do not want them bidding a job until the building department comments are baked into the project. So it takes longer. That's what leads to addenda and change orders, is if the documents are not complete, you will not get a complete bid. Your earlier question about what oftentimes gets overlooked, what they will come back with they have to do this, is the qualifications and assumptions in their GMP, guaranteed maximum price or guaranteed minimum price, however you want to define it. And so in the qualifications and assumptions, that document could be 5 pages long, 1 page long. It could be, so you have to assign dollar figures to each one of their exclusions and $1 to their assumptions. Those are called, allowances, right? And so you have to have all of that defined before you can sign a contract, so nothing gets overlooked.
Right.
And I think that's a really good point. Is permit comments are one of the things that can often get overlooked, right? They're and it's very specific to each municipality, but that's where we see the biggest unknown sometimes. And to Brian's point, we don't want to lock in a price with a GC until after we have all that information baked into the drawings.
And you say that's about 80% when they're going into?
Yeah, we would go in
permit,
right around the same
permit.
time, right around 80 to 90%, somewhere in there. And now prior to that, when we're doing design development level budgets or even a 50% CD budget, there is subcontractor input on specialty trades, right? And we work closely with the GC and their team to make sure we also aren't kind of overpricing the sub-market, right? If somebody prices the same job 5 times, they start to not take it as seriously as they did the 3rd time that they price it. So we want to make sure that we're pricing at key milestone dates when certain amount of development of the documents has taken place, but it's never really a hard bid until we get to that final stage.
So Neil, I'm going to ask the GCs this same question, but I've walked into way too many clubs where how'd the project go? Well, if they had gotten their work done on time, it would have been perfect, or we would have, whatever. What do we do to prevent that from happening? And I think it's everything we're talking about, but what's the horror story there, or the best practice that you would absolutely, if there's one takeaway you want everybody here to have to prevent that from happening, what is it?
I mean, I think a lot of it is what we've said, which is building a very strong team culture from the beginning. Right? I'm not going to walk into the meeting and I'm wearing the Spino O'Rourke jersey and the contractor's wearing their jersey. We're wearing the jersey of the club when we walk into that room. And as long as every member of the team has that same mindset from the beginning, then it's going to be a successful project in the end. Even if there is this is what the drawing said and this is what we thought type of conversation that happens at some point. And I think it's up to the owner's rep or it's up to all the team members. If we see people aren't wearing the same jersey early in that process, then we need to talk about it, right? And figure out how to deal with that conflict resolution early instead of in the middle of construction.
Right.
And even make recommendations on substitution of team
Yes.
members. If they're not going to wear the jersey.
Yeah.
So does that get back, in your view, that the architect should be the quarterback on this?
It's been the traditional role for hundreds of years. And I think it's kind of shifted a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
And I'm going to ask these guys too, what they think. So
and let me add to that. There are 2 things that I think are critical to the success. As much as we want to believe that our clients fully understand what's in those documents. You were not trained as architects and interior designers and kitchen designers and lighting designers. We have to spend the time with you and page flip with your team members, your department heads, and fully understand what these 500 sheets of drawings and the 1,000 sheet of specifications are really saying for you to be an informed consumer. Because oftentimes, once we go to bid and once construction starts, the chef changes, or the GM changes, or the director of golf changes, or somebody changes, and then we're kind of shifting. We want to always please our client, but there's going to be the point where we're going to say, let's go with what we have, and we can modify it later. But if we don't stay the course with the price they gave us and the schedule they gave us, there will be long-term implications to the project. So I think that's very critical. And the other thing I could leave you with is allow the drawings to get completed. What you'll always hear from a contractor when they give you a change order is, well, the drawings weren't clearly defined in that area, and our subcontractor gave us an additional cost to do whatever it might be. And that's true. Oftentimes the drawings aren't completed before they get to bid it and build it, because we got late information that we couldn't coordinate, or a substitution, or a VE item, or whatever. Allow the book to be written before you publish it. We spend a year writing the book. They get 2 to 4 weeks to read the book and have all of these hundreds of subcontractors understand the book. It's an unfair process unless they're at the table with the people that they rely on to be successful to read the book as we write it. And so, simple analogy, but it leads to the most successful projects.
So we're down to our last 8 or 9 minutes here. So if any of you have some questions, please text them to me. Neil, I'm going to ask you this, and it's kind of interesting too, because I've heard this said to me many times. Wouldn't it be great if we could just start over? You know, we've got this clubhouse that was built, 25, 30, 35 years ago. All the codes have been updated weekly these days. I know it's a lot these days. How do we manage, and what's your perspective? And I know it's covered a very wide angle as I say this, because all depends, but you can do a much better drawing if you're starting from scratch, right? There's far fewer change orders.
Right.
How do we balance what makes the most sense there, Nilo? And again, it's a broad question, but as best you can address that.
Yeah, and I think that the real answer to that starts even before there is a project, or even before we get involved as architects. And there's kind of ongoing capital maintenance and improvements that need to take place inherently as part of the culture of a club, right?
Right.
And I know those are usually tough projects to try to market and sell to the membership, right? You're going to spend $2 million or $3 million on something that looks just like it did.
Yeah.
Before
love
they
that
started.
new roof. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And they don't get to enjoy it. There's no tangible benefit to it. But staying with the analogies, you don't get to just keep driving your car until the tires fall off. You have to replace the tires, and it's painful to do sometimes. But that helps get in front of a lot of the issues that we would run into in the wholesale renovation of an existing building, right?
And to your credit, having a capital dues assessment monthly or annually is critical to the success of selling a project, because funding depreciation is so critical. And then having a look to the future, what does the next 10 to 15 years look like for the age of the building and the recent replacements? Because oftentimes, when you start with a 10-year vision and you have that budget to build the next budget of code upgrades or expanding, adding the bar, doing whatever it might be, or replacing the clubhouse because it's no longer relevant to today's code world and membership activity level, it's a lot easier sell, for sure, is having data and I go back to the data.
Right.
Make it data driven.
One of the interesting things that I had a slide that I jumped over on this, but you all sitting in the room know we're hugely capital intensive environments in the club world. Interestingly, and I've worked so closely, as have many in the room, including you guys, with club benchmarking. Statistically, it's kind of an interesting perspective. Clubs over the last 10 years have, on average, the median, on average club has spent 154% of its annual depreciation. So quickly, what do I mean by that? If you've got $3 million of depreciation annually on your balance sheet, or on your books, 10 years, that's 30 million of depreciation you've written off. The average club in America has spent $46.2 million, 154% of its 10-year depreciation. We're doing projects on steroids, and keeping up with this deferred maintenance. We're capital intensive environments, and if we don't educate the members and keep them up to speed, I also get asked a lot, how do clubs finance this? Pretty typically, it's a third
Right.
new initiation fees, a third capital dues, and a third one-time assessments that you might be able to pay a couple of different ways, but that's pretty typical.
We'll add reserves to that because in today's world in Florida.
If you're a POA, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're a POA club. So it gets pretty interesting. A couple of final questions. Crystal ball, what's the next big trend that we should be anticipating?
Well, I think it has to involve outdoor living because the pandemic taught us that we like fresh air and sunshine. So I would say gathering spaces where people could, we're doing a lot more outdoor exercise pavilions than we ever have. We've created a culture of people that enjoy the resort experience at the club. So we're doing a lot more salon, spa, soaking mineral tubs, cold plunge. We do enjoy living longer pain-free. So the physical therapy aspect at the club and fitness and wellness. I have a list a mile long. I don't think it's one thing. It's, it's how are we going to enjoy life longer at the club, pain-free.
Neil, how about you?
I think we're seeing a lot of the same things. More amenities geared towards younger families. Expanded kids clubs, more bars, always more bars. I think we're also seeing bars in places in outdoor gathering spaces where they traditionally haven't been. So as part of like a learning center component. So it's a learning center and social event space, where maybe historically it had just been a golf learning center.
And we always say bocce's just a good excuse to drink.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So incorporating that more into the active spaces, and as Brian said, expanded wellness services, things like cold plunges and various treatment facilities on property as opposed to nearby.
Yeah, one-stop shop inside the gates, right?
Yeah. Marketplaces, we're seeing a lot more smaller marketplaces, coffee shop, cafe style, early morning stops, instead of the formal dining hall that we're used to seeing.
I'm curious whether either of you, as I travel around the country, from a racket sports perspective, the next big thing I'm hearing is padel. And there's more padel players in the world than there are tennis players or pickleball players.
I will theorize.
I built the first one in Isleworth years ago.
I did, and that's quite a facility up there. It's not as social as pickle, and I think because of the socialization aspect of pickleball, and we're doing more gathering and hang areas for rackets, where heretofore you have the great hang for the after golf experience, but never for the rackets. So having those gathering spots, a bar, and the ability to view the other people playing is definitely a trend.
And I love your use of hang, and it reminded me, I was once working with a club where one of the board members was a mall developer, which may be becoming a little bit dinosaurish here now too, unfortunately. But what he said, what we try to do in the mall world is figure out how to increase hang time.
Yeah,
And so you wander through the mall that much longer. We're trying to do that at clubs. So
no question.
yeah.
Yeah.
So last question for you both. Neil, I'll start with you. And great question. What are clubs doing? And this, I think, is a fairly overlooked piece of the puzzle. We build some beautiful environments here, but who cleans the chandelier? How do we manage the ongoing maintenance piece? When does that get considered in this whole thing? Because I've seen what you guys do. You build some beautiful things, but I'm the guy that's got to operate it. And Paul and I were talking when I walked into Frenchman's Reserve today. These beautiful porte cocheres. Who cleans the cobwebs? And they're beautiful here, Paul, by the way. But who cleans the cobwebs?
The cobwebs are
there?
beautiful.
Yeah. No, there's no cobwebs.
Yeah.
But when do you figure in how do we maintain what we're building, and how do you put that into the whole equation?
Yeah, I mean, we want to bring the facilities director, or the person responsible for the ongoing operation of that, into the conversation as soon as possible. Right? They're part of one of those kind of early team members that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, and I think that, coupled with some of the images you showed of increasing the comfort of employee lounges, employee spaces, helps bring the right team and draws the right and keeps them here. That's what's so important. Is there's an efficiency in having the same team managing certain parts of the same property for a long period of time. And I think it's a twofold answer. It's us, being sensitive to the fact that somebody has to maintain this when we're all gone.
Right.
And making sure that we're having conversations that help with retention of employees and retention of staff.
So it's also first cost versus life cycle cost.
Yep.
This was designed for a developer. And so a lot of the things that we would design for members would get cut out. So these chandeliers for a member-owned club would have an automatic lift so that, it would be built into the design. We don't design a chandelier until we know the weight and the wattage. And so we have to reinforce where that's being hung from. And do you want to go ahead and invest in so to lower it to the floor, clean it, change the lamps, and then, first cost versus life cycle.
Yeah.
We get challenged with it every day. We're going to bring the best ideas. Oftentimes, it doesn't fit into the equation.
Gotcha.
I mean, exterior
We're going to
materials.
ask you guys about this too. So to get us all on the same page on it all. So we're right at our time. Can't thank you enough for your insights.
Thank you,
Nilo
guys.
and Brian are going to be staying, and there's several other of you who had questions to me. I couldn't get to them all, but pick their ear, pick their brains and corner them. They'll be here through lunch, but join me in thanking these guys for their good insight.